In this session, we'll be looking at the book of Ephesians. It is part of a group of books written by Paul called the Prison Epistles, which are the books of Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and Philemon. They are grouped this way because Paul refers to being in prison when he wrote them. We are not sure where he was in prison when he wrote these, but we know he was imprisoned several different times. These books are also grouped together because they have similar material, and some were literally carried and delivered together. We need to explore another key introductory issue before we jump into the book. The book was not written to the Ephesians or the church in Ephesus. The words "to Ephesus" in chapter 1, verse 1 were added well after the book was written. It seems that the letter was originally a circular letter, meaning it was not written to a specific person or group, but rather a general letter meant to be handed on. Because of this, it focuses on general issues and does not focus on specific problems tied to specific places or people. In this book, Paul wants us to understand that salvation results in a radical transformation of who we are. Many people think of salvation in shallow ways. For example, when people are asked what happened when they came to know God or restored their relationship with God, many will mention what they stopped doing or changed in their behavior. Paul wants us to understand that this is not salvation. Yes, there are consequences for what we do, but that is not the heart of how we change. For Paul, salvation results in a radical change in our very being. Paul teaches this point through a series of 3 before and after illustrations found in chapters 2 and 3. The first illustration is found in chapter 2, verses 1 through 10, where Paul says that before Christ transforms us, we are dead to God. Think about that. God reaches out to embrace us, but we can do nothing. But because of the work of Christ, we are made alive. We can interact with God. In fact, not only are we made alive, we are seated next to Christ. The second illustration of this radical transformation is found in chapter 2, verses 12 through 19. Before the work of Christ, we are aliens. Much like the political term, this means that we live in a nation but have no privileges or rights of citizenship. After the work of Christ, we are citizens. We have the status and protection of the nation. However, we're not only made citizens of God, but are citizens in God's own household. This is like being adopted by a presidential family. While a child is a citizen, just like anyone else, the family they are a part of gives them more advantages and opportunities than they would have had on their own. Just like this example, God gives more advantages and opportunities to those who are part of His family. The third illustration is one of knowledge, which is found in chapter 3. Before the work of Christ, we lacked knowledge of who God was. It is not just that we did not know, but that we did not know that we did not know. We were ignorant about our ignorance. However, after the work of Christ, Paul says that we are allowed to understand who God is as God reveals Himself to us. Ephesians chapter 3, verses 17 through 18 says, "And I pray that you, being rooted and established in love, may have power, together with all the Lord's holy people, to grasp how wide and long and high and deep is the love of Christ." While our minds are limited, it does not limit God from expressing the full range of who He is to us because of the work of Christ. From these 3 illustrations, Paul wants us to understand that salvation is more than just what we do or who we spend our time with. Salvation is a dramatic transformation of who we are. It is with this understanding of salvation that we are expected to be very different individuals in the way we lead our lives. Remember that the people we are, the ways we behave, and the things we do are the consequences of a relationship with God. However, they can never take the place of a relationship with Him. We should never confuse what a person does with why they do it. With this understanding of Paul's discussion about how we have been changed in Christ, Paul turns to his directions on what our relationships with others should look like. While he talks about several different areas, your reading focused on 2 of them. First, He tells us to put off our old self and put on our new self. Again, it is important to remember that Paul's direction is a product of the way our very nature has changed because of the work of Christ. When he says we should put off our old self, he means that we should reject the attitudes and behaviors that separated us from God in the first place. Things that made us dead, made us aliens, and made us ignorant. He then says that we should put on our new self. We should embrace attitudes and behaviors that build our walk with God. Last, Paul spent some time giving directions to a married couple in chapter 4. When most people hear these verses, it is not uncommon for one to think of what the other person in the relationship should do. How a husband relates to his wife, or a wife relates to her husband, is based first upon the way that Christ related to the church. In a sense, Paul is asking all wives, how do you treat your husband? If a husband wonders how he must treat his wife, Paul asks, how did Christ treat the church? If a husband and wife relate to each other on this principle, Paul knows that they will both be fulfilling their divine obligation by loving each other and will have a rewarding marriage. Now that you have walked through the book of Ephesians, take some time to explore the relational questions.